everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the second edition of Web Chats, a series of virtual conversations with alumni and friends of the Webb School. My name is Jonathan Hawkins, Webb's Director of Alumni Relations and Annual Giving, and it is a pleasure to have you with us as we kick off the Webb Book Club. Tonight, we are listening in to a conversation between two outstanding members of our community, and I'm sure many of you know both of them. Longtime Webb faculty member Stan Rupley, who spent the majority of his teaching career at Webb serving as chair of the English department, director of studies, and assistant headmaster, as well as the first holder of the fallen chair of English. And class of 1977 alumna Julia Claiborne Johnson, who is the author of the best-selling Be Frank With Me and the book we're talking about tonight, the LA Times bestseller, Better Luck Next Time. During this webinar, we certainly encourage questions, so please feel free to type your questions or comments into the Q&A or chat, and we will do our very best to answer them. My colleague, Kristen Linton, and I will be behind the scenes trying to get those questions answered. As always, the opinions expressed in this webinar are the panelists' own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Webb School. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to hand it off to Mr. Rupley, and welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be asked to have this role. I taught Julia as a junior and as a senior, and her mom was our family doctor, delivered our oldest daughter, Jennifer. And I taught with her dad, Alsey. He was the chairman of the English department when I came to Webb. He taught English and French there at Webb. And the Johnson Fort Memorial Travel Scholarship is named in his honor, as well as in honor of Joyce Fort, a longtime teacher and a middle school coordinator at Webb. Let me be frank, Julia's first book is really an excellent read, and I would recommend it to anyone, even if she weren't my former student. But it's very different.
And it's called Be Frank With Me.
Yes, excuse me. Let me be frank. And
Be Frank With Me. Richard Russo wrote the other one.
This
there
book.
you go. That one, yeah, there we go. Now you're cooking with gas.
And I think her second book is even more terrific in terms of plot and character suspense, the themes and so forth. There's lots to talk about, and we only have a little bit less than an hour, so let's get into our discussion. Julia, tell us a little bit about the origin of the story, how you came to this.
Well, a hilarious little known fact about my father was that during the Depression, now, if Daddy were still alive, he'd be 104. He was born in 1916. But during the Depression, he had this job working as a divorce cowboy, like a fake cowboy on a divorce ranch outside of Reno, because you would go to Reno and live there for 6 weeks and be granted citizenship, and then they could give you a divorce. And so he ended up with a job like this. I know very little about it other than a couple of funny stories he told, but it was a jumping off place because, I think I was like probably 40 before I was like, everybody's father did not work as a cowboy on a divorce ranch outside of Reno. But by then it was too late. I couldn't really ask him questions. So I had to do research about it, but it seemed like such a good idea for a book and like an opportunity for me to find out more about that part of his life that I didn't know a lot about. Can you guys show the picture of Daddy when he was just leaving for World War II? He was super handsome and very charming and a good dancer. Are you guys still there? Can you pull it up? Daddy in the Army uniform? Maybe not. Okay, but there we go. But so see, he was very attractive, and he, in the book, I imagined that the guy had a job working construction and then heard about it out west and then heard about this job and went. And then my brother, just a week or two ago, said, well, you know how he had that job? He was working construction out west, and he heard about this job and thought it'd be more fun to dance with ladies than to dig ditches. So off he went, which was great because it was what I had imagined. And he was only 19. That was the big difference. And his father, when he found out, went and dragged him home from this slightly scandalous job that he had. So that was the jumping off place. So you can, there we go.
Well, what about the title? What's the origin of the title?
Oh, Better Like That. This is even better. Recent developments, Mr. Rupley. So there's the most famous divorce judge in Reno was named George Bartlett. And every time he divorced somebody, granted their divorce, he'd hit his gavel and say, better luck next time. And so that was the title. So, and he was a real person. So I was telling this story to my cousin Denise, who lives in Como, Mississippi. And she's like, you know, his grandson, Mike Bartlett's one of my best friends. And I was like, no kidding. So then this weekend, like just yesterday, I was talking to Denise and she said, you know, you've had dinner with Mike Bartlett. When you were on book tour last time, we all went out to dinner in Oxford. And I was like, that was Mike Bartlett? You know, because I knew his name was Mike. I didn't know what his, you know, it didn't stick with me because I didn't know that his grandfather was going to become a part of my future at that point. But I just thought, oh, that's such a good title for it. And I read his memoir, which was fabulous. And it was just story after story about, you know, various divorces. And if anybody reads my book, they should read the acknowledgments because it talks about him and the acknowledgments.
The title's a bit ironic also, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you never know. And I mean, that's really sort of the crux of the whole book, because there's a speech there. The people who run the ranch are named Maxwell Gregory, and his partner is named Margaret. And so Margaret, it's in the 40s somewhere. It's like page 45 or maybe 47. And there's a speech where she sort of says the whole thing, like, you know, it's all about luck. And, you know, if you have to be in the right place at the right time and whatever. And that page, Mr. Rupley, I wrote that for 3 months, all day long, typing, because I knew it was so important and I had to get it right. And I was stuck there for 3 months. And I thought, you know, I could go lie down around in the street and a car would run over me and I would be out of this because it was so hard to get it right. But then one day it just came. And so then it sort of states the whole premise of the book, but artfully, so that you don't realize that I'm saying, excuse me, in case you don't know what this book is about, let's take a moment.
Right.
To talk about it.
Well, there's so many seeds that you plant early in the book that come to fruition later on. It's really well crafted. Tell us about how you came to create that plot. Did it just spring full blown, or did it evolve as you were writing?
Oh, the plot. You know, can you guys put up the copy of my closet, that picture? Because I don't plot things in advance, Mr. Ripley. I just start and I have like a vague idea of how it's going to go. And then when here it comes, then I keep track of it as I've written it. So if you look at this big cardboard board here on the left, these are all Post-it notes, the yellow square things. And one of my novelist friends told me the thing that changed my life, which was push pins, because Post-it notes, when you stick them up, they flutter away sometimes. And then you're like crawling around on the floor trying to find them. But a push pin, let me tell you. And so that's why I have cardboard. So this is every chapter as I wrote it. And then the blue stuff, that's the next column going up and down. That's what my husband's a TV writer. He calls it sequencing. So it's action that happens over several chapters. And then the two yellow columns after that, one's the first line of the chapter and the other one is the last line of each chapter, because I wanted to make sure I had momentum going. And then the pink double line is each chapter in one sentence. And then that way, and these things hanging at the bottom over here, you can probably see their circles. That's a chart of the phases of the moon in June of 1938, June and July, because I had to make sure people could see things that they were supposed to see at night. And then there's also maps under there. And then all these random Post-it notes or ideas that I might use. I never did, I don't think, but they were there just in case. And so it helped me keep track of my story, because in every chapter you have to end a chapter and I would say to myself, what has changed? Because if you just talk and there's no forward motion, that's how books get to be boring, like the situation has never changed. I don't know if that answers your question, Mr. Ripley, but that's what I did. Yeah. So
we'll save the ones on the right hand side for the next book.
Believe me, everything's in an envelope. I was like, you never know. It might be gone. And you know, with the first book, with Be Frank With Me, there was and when I originally thought it was going to end at a point, I knew what the last sentence was the whole time. And then my editor said, you know, I think there needs to be another short chapter. And I was like, oh, for the love of God, but okay. And she said, you know, she explained why she thought so. And I said, wait a minute, there's some things I haven't used. There were 3 things that go into that last chapter that were on a Post-it note like that, stuck to one side because I might use it someday. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, there it is. Yes, I'll do it. I can use these things. So
what about your characters? First of all, just the names that you chose for those.
Oh,
Is there a
that's so
method
funny
to
because
that?
here's my tip to you, to anybody out there who wants to write a novel. For your first novel, do not write a novel about a novelist who's having a hard time writing a second novel. Because that was what the first one was about. And the second novel almost killed me. And I would think, oh my God, how did I do this to myself? And the first novel is about somebody who's stuck, but also she has a hard time naming her characters. So in this, when I was getting ready, and it's so hard, that's a problem I have. I have a really hard time naming characters. So this time I had read a lot of books about the 30s and like novels that were written in the 30s and books about people who'd written novels in the 30s. And a lot of had named characters after friends of theirs. And I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. Well, I should do that. I can't use my relatives because if you like get into that can of worms, then everybody's well, like, why did you pick me and not me? Kind of thing. So it's like, okay, who's safe? Who would be thrilled to be in a book? And there would be no animosity in any way. And I was like, oh my God, booksellers, because I had made so many bookseller friends with the first book across our nation. So I was like, there are two names in there that are straight up booksellers. One is Emily Summer, who is, she works at East City Bookshop in Washington, D.C. And Maxwell Gregory used to work at Lake Forest Books in Illinois, except she does something else now, and she's a he in this book. And then I would take part of one name, part of another name. I would Google them to make sure people were naming their kids that at that point, because you couldn't name a character like Destiny because nobody was naming their kid Destiny and whatever year they had to be born. I had all these charts like they were born this year. Okay. And it's very labor intensive, but if you do the stuff in the beginning, then you don't get as tripped up in the end. So that's how I came up with the names.
What about the protagonist and his name?
Award. I knew that I wanted to make a joke early on, and it's in the first or second chapter where they say somebody's trying to remember his name and she says, oh, Ward, like an orphan in a Victorian novel taken in by a relative. And so I was like, I want him to be named Ward. Who am I going to name him after? And there's a guy who lives in Memphis, Tennessee named Howard Stovall, who went to college with my husband. And when I went on book tour the first time, he put us up in Memphis and he was so nice to us. He took us out to dinner. So I named him Ward Bennett. That's somebody else's last name, but his name's Howard Stovall Bennett. And it's after him. So it's just, he's like, when the audiobook came, I turned it on and the first time he says Howard Stovall, I had to like turn it off and sit there and go. So it's a totally weird thing. And I feel like I didn't even do it to him. I was like, wow, Howard, that must be so weird. So.
Well, in the material that you created for the Barnes and Noble edition, you talk about the fact that you felt like you created a high desert Jay Gatsby. And as I was reading it, I not only thought of Jay Gatsby, I also thought of Nick Carraway. Have you ever thought about the role that Ward plays really as a commentator, as much as one who's I guess being led to discoveries about life and marriage?
Oh yeah, he's totally the Nick Carraway. And in the first book, like the woman who's the narrator there, I thought of her as the Nick Carraway character. She's just the commentator who's like taking it all in, because that's sort of, I don't know, easier for me anyway, is to have somebody. But we should talk about the Barnes and Noble edition, because they made me like, it was the January book club pick. So they told me in October and I had to keep it secret till January, which almost killed me. And they said, we have to have 3 extra chapters, bonus material, whatever you want. And I was like, hot dog, because I had written this book in what turned out to be second person. I don't know. Did you know this, Mr. Rupley? If you're addressing it to a view, it's second person. I thought it was first person. I guess I wasn't paying attention in your class. Anyway, but I'd always thought it was going to be first person. And then the last chapter would be third person. And so I turned it all in the end. And my editor was like, I really love the last chapter, but it has to be in the same person. It has to be second person like the rest of the book. And so I had to put aside that chapter, but that's one of the bonus chapters in this one, is that it's in here. And it also tells you who the you is, because you never find out in the general public version of it. It identifies that person. And there are a couple of other things. Some people are alive in one version that are dead in the other. it's just so crazy, because you're just like, I mean, I wrote so many different versions of that last chapter, and so many people lived and died and like were born and never lived, and another one. It was nuts. So
Well, I like the final chapter that you came up with rather than
the one that's here.
original.
Yeah, well, that's good. And she was right. She knew what she was talking about. My editor is very brilliant, but when they're telling you that, you're just like holding your head and going, no. So
With the settling of the Dude Ranch, we have all these people coming together that are in that picture that is shared with Ward. And some become friends and some don't, but the friendship between Nina and Emily, of course, is central to the book. It seems pretty unlikely that those two would be paired. Talk with us a little bit about the dynamics between those two.
Say you're in an elevator with people that you can't imagine yourself hanging out with in real life, and it gets stuck, and you're stuck there for 2 to 3 days. You will become very close friends with those people. And then that gives you an opportunity to establish a rapport with people that you might not go for. And there's the character in there called the Zeppelin, who's an older lady, and they kind of make fun of her at the beginning. And then by the end, Ward is like, it made me realize, sometimes you misjudge people. Like you have a bad first impression and you decide you're never going to like them, and then in the end you like them better than anybody else. So that was sort of what I was trying to get at, is like, you just never know who you're going to be friends with, and if you'll let yourself be open to it. Oh, can we show the picture of my hair? This is a non sequitur, but it just made me think about it. The elevator is why I thought about it. Before I started writing this book, I was not going to cut my hair until I was done. So this is how, on the left is how long it was when I started, and on the right is how long it was when I turned in my draft. So that gives you a visual of how long it took. But I used to joke that I was going to climb down my hair out the elevator is what made me think about it. I was going to like finish the book and then climb down my hair out of the window and like run for the hills. So you can take that away, but I just found that very amusing. So
how many months was it between conception and the first draft?
Beginning to end, first draft. Oh, gee whiz. The one I turned in, well, I wrote it 3 times, because the first version I wrote in third person just to be different from the first novel. And then my editor was like, I don't know, Julia. I mean, you're all voice and throwaway jokes, and this third person is not serving you. So I threw it away and I started all over. And then I turned in the second version, and she said, I love the prologue. I hate the rest of it. And I don't remember what was different about the rest of it. I did love the prologue. I knew it was better than the rest. So I threw the rest away. And then the third time, like that version, I wrote in 8 months, but I really wrote the whole book in 3 years, because part of the 3-year process is just getting to know everybody. I think that's part of why I was able to write it so fast, was I knew who everybody was at that point. So
the Bennett family sub-story, the subplot there with the uncle and all of that. Talk about the links between it and the main plot.
Well, I mean, his uncle is kind of a wastrel, and he wants the glamour of richness without the work of becoming rich, which, don't we all? But a lot of what's interesting to me about a lot of the wives, like the trophy wife kind of people who were at the divorce ranches, is they had like looked around and gone, the quickest way to get rich is to marry somebody rich. And so they sort of were living out a more literal version of what he had tried to do. So that was why that was linked up in there. But I don't know if does that answer your question? That was what I was thinking about when I was doing it.
And what about the considerations about the family home and Ward wanting to ensure that he repurchases that?
Oh yeah, because he just wants his family. Like what happened was his uncle sort of fleeced the family, and they lost everything. They lost the company, and they lost the house that his father had built for his mother. And so he decides at one point, kind of surprises himself, says, I'm getting the house back no matter what. And so eventually he does get it back, but then he realizes the hard lesson is it's not the house, it's the family. Like he sort of couldn't see the forest for the trees. So he thought if he got the house back, he'd have his life back. But what he really needed was a family, and he'd missed the boat at that point. So.
And you have that scene where the furniture's covered in drapes, and he talks about it being the ghosts essentially
of all the
that would
kids.
reside. Yeah.
Yeah, the kids that could have been there.
And really, he had abandoned his adopted family, I guess, at the Dude Ranch.
Yeah, because he sort of
made.
didn't value, he didn't realize what he had. And I think that happens to people a lot. Like you don't realize what you have until it's gone. And he tries to kind of get them all back, but you know, it's too late sometimes. And I think it's harder for men too. I don't know. You can tell me if this is true, Mr. Rupley. Like you think you got plenty of time. I got all the time in the world. And then you wake up one day and you're 85 and you've missed the boat entirely. So this did not happen to you, believe me, but just in general.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's essentially a male trait or whether
it's a personal trait. I don't know. So
since we're talking about maleness, what about how difficult was it to write about a male character, particularly an older male character?
Well, I feel like I'm an old man myself, but you know what was fun about it was like he's irritated about the fact that they just are looking at him as eye candy because he was a smart guy and as a man in those days, because you know there's that joke about like how literature is like the canned remains of men at that point because there was no place for women, and this was the rare situation where the guys were secondary. They were just there for entertainment, and I think that was very hard for him to deal with. So that vexation that he felt was very easy to channel. And you know, when my mother, who you know, was young, she used to tell me when she was a kid, somebody told her if she kissed her elbow, it would make her a boy. And so she spent her entire childhood trying to kiss her elbow because she wanted to go to medical school. And then, you know, I've always found that story very sad. But Nina is a lot like her in the sense that it irritates the heck out of her that people want to sideline her because she's a woman and she's going to do whatever the heck she wants to and sort of get past it. And at the same time for Ward to be sort of shuffled aside, he's like a chorus girl in this story. He's just there to look at.
There's so much humor in the story.
Mm-hmm. How did that happen?
Did you get any input from your writer husband on that?
Don't ask me that. That makes me so mad. People always ask me if my husband writes my jokes. I'm like, I'm funny. I don't need his help. And he doesn't really like to read fiction. So I seldom ask him to read anything. So usually what he does is reads the first draft. I'm trying to think if he's ever pitched a joke that I've used. I don't know. But you know, when he worked at Beavis and Butthead, I came up with an idea for a classic Beavis and Butthead, which they made. So not to brag, it's a two-way street. But I will say that living with somebody who's as funny as he is has really helped my banter because like we talk like they talk in the book all the time. Like we're always like looking for where's the joke in this? So that in that sense, he is super helpful. But no, he doesn't, you know, actually sit down and go, let me pitch some jokes to you for this. So
particularly, I like the banter between Zeppelin and Nina. The back and forth.
Oh yeah, because you know, Chris, my husband loved the Zeppelin, and I said, "Well, the Zeppelin's me. That's why you love the Zeppelin. Thank you." And I really loved Nina, and he said, "Well, Nina's you too." And I was like, "Well, see, there you go. That's why the two of them. That's why they like both butt heads and sort of get along in a beautiful way because they're both versions of me. I mean, I guess that's true with most novelists that all the characters there's a part of you in. I don't know, or somebody you know. So,
what about Mary Louise?
Mary Louise says some hilarious things. And there's one story in particular, the thing about like, I don't worry about getting back at people because the Almighty always takes care of it for me. Somebody actually told me a story not unlike that once. And I just like was looking at her going, okay. And then I wrote the joke about how like, you know, she's like, it's wrong to say mean things about, well, it's wrong to wish people are dead or something. So I just pray for it instead. Because her pastor told her it was it was wrong to do, it was a sin. So she's like, I just pray for it. Now I was like, oh my God, that's so funny because she just totally misses the boat on what's coming out of her mouth. So you will often in life, and I think you'll back me up on this, Mr. Rupley, find people who will say the kind of thing and you think I know exactly what that is. So
and she's so clueless. I mean, she's been places, she's had the advantage of wealth, and none of it is
None of his stuff. She's not a
none of
student
it's
of
stuff.
history. Yeah, she
No.
doesn't know when Marie Antoinette was alive. She just knows that she has her china set. So,
Of course, I think the funniest segment is probably the costume party, when you have these characters all go into town dressed in costumes of various sorts. How did you come to conceive of that?
Well, I'll tell you, when all those books about the 30s I read, there was one real person, I don't remember what her name was now, she was a gold digger, and she had married progressively richer men, and she'd grown up on a dirt farm in Texas and just kept marrying richer guys. And so she went to some party, and all she was wearing was a pair of red high heels. And she's like, I need to let them see what the merchandise is like. That's not directly what she said, but it was essentially what she said. And that just made me laugh every time I thought about it. And I was like, that would be so funny to have somebody walk into a party who's essentially naked. And that's how there's a paper mache head from a costume that's from Bottom from Midsummer Night's Dream. And so when I was trying to think of because it would have to be her mask, so you wouldn't know who it was. And my husband, oh Jesus, how Freudian, my son had played Bottom in a production, and he had this paper mache donkey's head that was so beautiful. And I have a picture of it, and I used to think about it all the time. I was like, oh, they can steal the costume so that she can walk in this donkey's head and nothing else. And
She had on her pearls.
And she had on a pearl, so the cowboy could know who it was. I know exactly who that is. So, and what was great about that, Mr. Rupley, was it sort of got the whole Midsummer, because the whole divorce ranch is sort of an idyll away from real life, and that's what the Midsummer Night's Dream is. So I could use the costumes for that and sort of work them in as metaphors, which you taught us about in AP English. But that was super gratifying because they really worked. There's a fairy costume that Nina's obsessed with and wears a lot, and it's because she's like the fairy godmother of the others, as it works out. And that's why she also flies an airplane. You would not get this just in a casual reading of it, but it meant a lot to me. I was like, oh, look what a good job I'm doing here. So,
well, I've read it twice, and each time I read it, there's more and more to be found there.
Oh, good.
Not only the Bottom's head, but then also the fairy costume and the wings.
Mm-hmm.
And the fairy costume becomes more tattered as it progresses through different wearers.
See what I did there?
Yes. And the wings. Now, at the end, Dumpling lines up with the wings.
Yeah, because he's I don't want to go into it too deeply, but because the symbol of the ranch is a Pegasus. And so it makes sense that somebody would put the wings on him eventually, but then it sort of is a portent of things to come.
Right.
So that made me very happy too. And I didn't come up with that particular thing until the next to the last edit, which is where they send it back to you, where you're supposed to, it's not the final typo edit, but this is where we need to make any changes we're going to make. And I hadn't read it in a month. And so I was like, oh my God, we can put the wings on Dumpling. So that was very satisfying.
What about having the narrator flash back as opposed to just telling it chronologically? What was behind your decision there?
Oh, I think as an older person myself, I can understand more of what was going on when I was young than I did when I was young. And I think that's very useful. And part of it too is my mother's 92 and she's in an assisted living facility, which is very sad to me because particularly in the last year, none of us can visit her. And she was so the center of people's lives in Shelbyville. And she delivered, there's a part where he tries to figure out how many babies he's delivered because he becomes a doctor like my mother. And all that stuff is from my mother, and just how she could have been so at the center and now to just be sort of at one side. I find that super. See, to me, this book, which is funny, I know, is super heartbreaking, but it's because it means more to me than it would mean to some people. So.
But if it had been told chronologically, we wouldn't have seen the lifelong impact, would we, of the events?
You wouldn't have understood. He didn't understand what a lot of it meant till later, and then you don't know what happened to everybody, which you can find out here. But I know for me, and I'm sure this is true with a lot of people, when you get to be my age, which is 60, almost 62, the things that happened to me in my 20s seem more exciting and real to me than what happened to me last week. Of course, nothing happens now because we're all trapped in our houses. But you know what I mean?
Last year.
Yeah, you just like the memories that have stuck with you really embedded themselves, and you think about them a lot, or I do. So
Nina's talking about Zeppelin, and she says even a broken clock is right twice a day. And of course, I think that relates to the suspicion, at least, that Emily is pregnant.
Mhm.
And was it your concept?
I felt like I basically said to people, I mean, I hope everybody's read this book because we're spoiling everything for you. But I felt like I said to people 40 times in this book, she's pregnant. Hey, everybody, she's pregnant. But I was trying to be very subtle about it. So I and a few people said, I totally didn't see it coming at all. I was like, oh, thank God. And it seemed like I felt like I've tried to foreshadow everything that was going to happen in the end, but I tried to be very cagey about it. And I don't know how successful I was. So
I think you were. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, there were enough suggestions there, but in a fairy tale, he would have conceived her child.
Mm-hmm.
And so as he goes into the real world and lives another 50 years, it's so late that he discovers, in fact, that fairy tale came true.
Right. And he didn't know she was pregnant while they were there. Right. So anyway.
And he didn't know the enduring love. I think the deal with the ring, her switching the rings is pretty touching. And when I got to the end of the novel, it was just an unintended outburst. The way that thing turned at the end, I think, was just
good. Wonderful. Excellent. I hope you sobbed brokenly, Mr.
No, I was happy for the guy.
Where are my Kleenex? Oh my God, my box is empty. But yeah, like with the ring, there's a foreshadowing of that too. And I don't know if you noticed it. I mean, we really shouldn't talk about it so much because we're going to destroy everything for the people who haven't read it. But I guess if it's a book club, they supposedly have read it. But there's a point where he says to the person, the color was wrong. Yeah. The color it should have been is more like the one that you have on. She's wearing the ring. I mean, I'm saying to you, she's got it on. Okay, everybody, this is the ring. So I'm telling you, I don't know did you notice that when you read through?
I did, yeah. And when you come to the end, then you have all these ahas because now I see where that tied in, and there was this other warning and suggestion this was
good. That was a lot of work. It takes years to write a book, as we could see from my hairline length evidence. And it just you lie awake at night and go, you're supposedly sleeping, and then suddenly you'll sit up and go, oh my God. And so I had like a Post-it note tab and like a pen by my bed, and I would write things down in the night, and then I'd look at it in the morning and go, I have no idea what this says. But just sometimes the act of writing it helps you remember it. So
and all the research that you put into it, I mean, I wouldn't have considered the phases of the moon at different times. I mean,
well, you have to think everything through because, I mean, you know how it's going to be. And so there's a map of the lake they go to, and I had to like do a lot of Googling about the lake, like how deep is it? Like, which can you park on the beach there? Blah, 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 and it was just endless. But the fun thing about research is you feel like you're working, but you're not pulling it out of your head. You're getting it out of books. So it seems so doable. So a lot of people fall into a black hole of researching, and that really, I have been known to do it myself because it's just so much more fun than just making stuff up out of whole cloth. Hey, do we have questions? It looks like my chat thing says something down there, but I don't see them on the screen. See where it says chat and there's like a little number 3. I don't know what it says. So if anybody wants to ask a question, just to pitch them up again. So what else you got for me, Mr. Rupley?
There really is a pyramid lake then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it has two, it's everything I said about it is true. And did I tell you this story? There's like the reason that sentence is in there, aside from the fact that it actually exists and it's super beautiful. And there was once a divorce ranch on its banks. I don't think it's there anymore. I mean, I know it's not as a divorce ranch. I don't know if it's still there in some other guise, but I have a friend who's a librarian in New York, and she had a friend who's an installation artist, which means they like, it's not like painting. She would like do a billboard of a word and see how many people looked up the word on Webster's and stuff like that. And so she said, my friend's trying to get a sentence into a novel, and I know you're writing a novel, will you try? And I said, sure. And the sentence was, why is the fish crying? So I had to think about that long and hard, and so then I sent him to the lake, because Pyramid Lake used to have like these trout that were like 4 feet long and weighed 90 pounds. And like they got fished out, so they're not there anymore. But that whole scene is there because of that one sentence. And then it turned out to be my favorite scene in the whole book, because it's sort of the brief respite before everything just totally comes apart. So
there's a question from George Huddleston, who asks, how much of your command for flows, processes, and mechanics in your books came from your experiences with your fun chemistry lab partner at Webb?
Every bit of it. I would be totally blocked if it weren't for George Huddleston. So, but yeah. But like when you can get a novel to work, Mr. Rupley, it's so thrilling. But when it's not working, there is no, darker time in your life. So there was a lot of misery. And what makes me happy about this book is I don't think you can tell how much misery went into the writing of it. So anyway,
the product that came out seems lots of fun.
Yes, thank God. And it came out at a time when people need fun, I think, like that, because a lot of the books that are coming out now are like grimy kind of stuff, because everybody feels bummed. And so it's sort of nice to have, because I had to listen to it last week because I had a meeting about it on Friday, and I haven't read it for a while. So I've listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook is spectacular. And I was able to listen to it and forget that I wrote it, because if somebody's performing it, it's a different kind of a thing. I was like, this book is kind of funny. There's some really sad parts. So, but that was just such a weird experience for me, So
I've told Julie this as I was reading it. What I kept hearing was her father's voice, that Brownsville, Tennessee drawl from Ward. But I think the lack of physical description of the characters. I mean, we get some. Stilts O'Malley is tall, and Nina's particularly petite.
Tiny.
But the lack of description of Ward leaves it open for the reader to envision
See
him
what he looks like
in just about any form at those two different ages.
Yes, and they do say they call him Cary Grant in Cowboy Boots at one point, and that he has a dimple in his chin, but that was really just so you could know. And this is another like clue that is laced through the whole thing. You could know, he keeps saying the Bennett genes are strong, because Chris used to work on a show. My husband worked on a show called I think it was on Hot in Cleveland, and the director and the director's son and the director's father I met all at a party, and they were like carbon copies of each other. It was nuts. I mean, I've never seen anybody who looked more alike than those three generations, and I was always sort of fascinated by that. And so I was able to sort of use that in this for my evil plans. So,
well, and the dimple, the description or the source of the dimple.
Oh, the God's thumbprint.
Yes, right.
My husband has that dimple, and both my children have it too. And my sister-in-law told me that story about how like it's the God grabs you by the chin when he's looking, and he turns your head side to side to see if you're done, and then he says, "This one's perfect," and because you're not quite baked, it leaves a thumbprint. So I always loved that story. So there was my chance to use it.
You're gleaning things as you go along.
Oh, my whole life. I'm trying to think, there's like a ton of things in there that are like just gags that I've thought of, or like things that happen, like little things. Oh, I wish I could think of a good example of it, but there are many of them. And that's what the fun part is, like when it's like an Easter egg hunt, because you're like, oh, look, here's this, I can use this. Oh my God, here's another one. So I was a very competitive Easter egg hunter as a child. You'll be surprised to hear.
Do you keep a writer's notebook, or is it largely the Post-it notes?
It's in here. Ward has the little notebooks that he keeps it in, but mainly I just stuff them in my brain. I really should write them down. And when I'm starting to write a book, I have these brown notebooks like this. This is for my next novel, and it has one sentence written on one page. But I write down everything I can think of that might be useful, and then keep track of it. And then when I'm writing it, I go through with a highlighter and I make notes on the side, because you just never know what's going to be useful to you.
Mhm.
So
What about the pairs of characters that you chose to have? You got Sam paired with Ward, Nina and Emily paired together.
mhm.
As a writer, what are some things that accomplishes for you and for the reader?
Well, you can see like, it makes you understand the differences between two. Like, for example, Nina and Emily being really tiny and really tall, that is a classic comedy pairing. I mean, think about it. And then they're just so different. And you can talk, if they're, you don't want your characters to all be the same, but it helps if there's a little bit of mirroring going on. It happened more in my first book, because they were like, the narrator and the woman she worked for were sort of mirror images of each other in different times of their life. And then also there's a kid and a handyman, and they are sort of two sides of the same coin, kind of, they both have too much of something. So it's useful that way. So I guess that's why I do it. I mean, anything to make it easier. It's really hard. So.
Well, and Sam sort of serves as a mentor for Ward
Mhm.
through
Yeah.
most of the recalling.
Oh my God, I love Sam so much. And my brother listened to the audiobook. And I don't know if you remember this guy who worked at Webb, whose name was Billy Holbrook. And Billy
Yes.
Holbrook used to always say, I can fix anything you got that's broke. And that's why Sam says it in the book. It was a tribute to Billy Holbrook. And my brother was listening to it, and he just started guffawing because it's toward the end of the book. He's like, oh, Billy Holbrook, there he is. So, but yeah, no, Sam was my favorite character. I really loved Sam. So
I think the Holbrook commercial is actually, or his comment is actually, I can fix anything with a ball peen hammer.
no, that was one, but that wasn't going to help me much in this situation. But you know what else was interesting to me? This is such a non sequitur, but you know how once the book starts, it's after the prologue, chapter 1. It's like he says, I drove the stagecoach to the airport to pick up Nina, and that thing about Reno was so fascinating to me. Like, within a generation, you had gone from stagecoaches to airplanes. And there's a part where they talk about, like a horse that you would have gotten hung for stealing, 50 years ago, you could almost get for free at that point, because it's the way life had just passed on and passed on and passed on.
Yeah.
So
Hannah Little, who's the librarian, has a couple of questions. First
let's
is,
hear 'em.
you have a trick for keeping your voice consistent through the novel? The narrator's voice consistent.
The narrator's voice consistent. Yes, I know that everybody talks a particular way. And so it helps it for me if you think of somebody. It's like that person that I thought of for Mary Louise, who would say things like, I don't have to worry about getting even with somebody because God always takes care of them for me. Like, I could think, okay, if she were in this situation, what would this person say? So that's very helpful. The fact that Zeppelin and Nina are kind of the same character, but at different stages in their life, that helps too. So, but it's hard, and you really have to, but there comes a point, for me, maybe a third of the way through, maybe halfway through, where oh, well, they wouldn't say that way. They would say it this way. So you've learned their voice at that point. I guess it's like learning a language. So anyway.
And
What
her
else?
second question is there a routine that you use as you're writing to avoid the sedentariness of just sitting at the computer or at a desk working?
Yes, I'm very like that. When I'm writing a book, I would be on writer lockdown. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I wouldn't talk on the phone, nothing. And I was very peeved when I finished it right as the pandemic started. So I got to do nothing or see anybody. But the one thing I would do is go on walks with friends of mine, because you have to have exercise. And what I do now, I used to go to the gym, but obviously I can't anymore. I run up and down the stairs, and I walk in circles in my house. And I have a rowing machine that I bought when I was 27 that's in the garage, and I use that because you can't, toward the end game, it gets rough and you can't always exercise every day, but it'll kill you if you don't get up and walk around. So I try to be careful about exercising some because you go nuts too. And your body starts to hurt. Like this hand hurts all the time. And when I'm typing, I learned how to mouse with my left hand just to give my right hand a break. And I wish I could learn to write with a pencil with my left hand. That would be huge. So what
A
else?
question from Sandy Pruitt, or Pewitt rather. Who are some of the authors that you particularly love?
Oh, I love two of my favorite books, which I realized when I think I talk about it in that special section in the Barnes and Noble thing. I love True Grit by Charles Portis, which is one of the best books ever written, and a triumph of voice. It's really hilarious. But and I've never managed to read any of his other books. And I also love Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and his books are all good. But I realized at one point, oh my God, I'm writing True Grit meets Remains of the Day, because the cowboys are the butlers, basically, is what it is. I love Ann Patchett. I have a picture of me with Ann Patchett because when I went on my book tour the first time. Oh, and we should say this: they have actual signed copies of my book at Parnassus in in Nashville. And I have, let's see, one of my favorite books is a book called I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, who wrote 101 Dalmatians. She wrote one novel in her whole life, but it's a terrific novel. So those are some.
What are you reading right now?
I just finished last night a book called Perestroika in Paris, which is by Jane Smiley. It was really good. It was very peaceful. And I was like, this is a good book to read right now. It's very peaceful. And you know what I just read too recently was The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donahue. And it's set in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic. And it's in a maternity ward for flu sufferers during that time. And I loved it. You would think it would be not the thing you would want to read right now, but it was hopeful and kind of peppy, and stuff happened in it. So I like that a lot too. So, and I have, oh, it's right here. This is one of my friends wrote this book that's coming out in May, I think. This is an advanced copy. It's like paperback, you can see. And I read it when it was manuscript pages. It's really funny. It's like Annie Mae, but it's an uncle. So, and I like funny books, and there are not a lot of funny books. So P.G. Woodhouse is funny. I like him. Anyway.
You mentioned that you have notes in a notebook. Have you technically started your next book?
There's one sentence in this notebook, Mr. Rupley. Pay attention.
So you have.
I'm afraid we're going to have to give you a B- for this class. But yeah, no. But it's interesting because in this week's Sunday New York Times magazine, they have a profile of Kazuo Ishiguro, and he talks about how when he's writing a book, he's 110% writing it. And when he's not, he's not. And I was like, oh, that's how I am. I'm like all or nothing at all. And he thinks about it for a while and makes a lot of notes about it before he actually starts writing. And that's how I am too. So clearly we are similar and probably just as good as each other. But you know what I mean? There's some people who write every day, no matter what. And I'm not that person, because if I don't have anything to write, I don't see the point. And when I'm ready, I'm ready. And when I'm not, I'm not.
So in 3 years, we'll see the next one.
God, I hope it's sooner. But a year of it takes is the editing and the printing. So even when you turn, and I was so mad when I finished this book because I held on to it for a long time because I wanted it to come out last March. Thank God it didn't. I mean, it did launch on January 6th, which was not the best day either. I don't know if you remember, a couple of things were happening that day, but it is what it is.
Any chance that there might be a sequel to this particular book, or even a prequel to it?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I sort of I think I move on. I don't know. You never know. Who can say? It's just sometimes it's not as good. There's a book I love called News of the World. Have you read that? It's by Paulette Giles. That's my favorite book, I think. And they just made a movie of it. It's not, doesn't live up to the book. And she wrote a companion piece, and it's not as good. But then The News of the World was a spinoff of another book she wrote called The Color of Lightning, which is quite good. And The News of the World was better than the first book, but then the third one, it had sort of so.
Some people have suggested this would make a great film. Have you thought about the possibility of becoming doing the screen version for this, screenwriting it?
That would be nice. I mean, I'm having meetings now, but we'll see. Like Frank, the first book, Better Luck. Now you've got me wrong. It's Be Frank with Me. Came out in 2016, and I wrote a screenplay for that over the summer, and somebody just optioned that, and that was 4 or 5 years ago. So it takes a long time, and nobody's working now because you can't. So we'll see, but that would be fun because this is a fun setup, and I enjoy the characters so much. So
If I get makeup, I could probably do Ward then.
yeah, you could be Max. You could run the joint. So
I could.
But it's funny because the guy who did the audiobook is so good, and he's an actor, and he's on Boardwalk Empire. And I was like, he should be in if they ever make a movie, he should be in it too, because he was so good at all the parts. And I thought, is that weird? I don't know. So
there is a difference
anyway.
between writing a novel and screenwriting, and now you've done both. Talk a little bit about that difference.
The difference is there are fewer words on a page in a screenplay, but it's really hard to do. Like, you have to really boil it down, and you have to present things very visually. So like for the Frank one, it starts differently. Like it's pretty true to the book, but there are a lot of things in it that are different because things that play in your head don't play on a screen, and they can't talk much. Because my rule for me is like, if there's more than 3 lines in their conversation for one person, you've gone on too long. Because when you talk to somebody, you don't talk that long. So that's really a skill. And some people are really good at screenplays who can't write novels, but vice versa. Because like Faulkner and all those guys came out here to write for movies, and you can't see it, but out my office window, there's a big fancy apartment building called the El Royale. And that's where Faulkner lived when he came out here to work in the motion pictures. It didn't go so well for him, but he lived in a nice place. So it's really, but there are some people who, I can't see his face. There's like somebody who wrote for The Wire who's a really good novelist. I can't think of his name, but some people are brilliant at both. I wish I would be one of those people. Are there any more questions? Because it looks like there are a bunch down there. It says 11.
One of the questions was, do you use pen and paper or type? And I think you're at a computer, correct?
I write at a computer, and I started to I write notes in paper, and I print it up. Like when I edit it, I have to print it up to edit it by hand. So, because I don't know how, because it helps to look at it in different ways. It makes you see different things. So I can't, and there are people who write books longhand. I don't know how their hands take it. They must be younger than me.
Has the whole atmosphere of being in the midst of a pandemic had any effect on you as a writer, do you think?
Well, I never left my house while I was writing, so I'm used to it. I'm trained for it for that way, but everybody's lonely, and you don't really, when you get to be out in the world and people tell you like stories, they stick with you, and you use them like 10 years later. So I really miss that. I really miss my friends, because I was like in lockdown for 3 years. And now I'm ready to come out, and everybody else is gone. So, but there's some people, I found it hard to read until August. Like I could not read at all, which does not bode well for me. And a lot of people either read a lot or they read nothing now. So there's a real, it messes with your head. So.
You read a lot while you're writing?
I read right before I go to sleep at night, but I tend to fall asleep instantly. So, because a lot of my energy goes into the writing, so I don't really read that much while but sometimes I'll read a book that I've read before, because it's something that I admire. And what I'll do sometimes, if I read a book that I think is really fabulous and I want to sort of figure out what they did, is I'll read it and then I'll instantly listen to the audiobook, because my brain is experiencing it a different way and I can see what they've done more somehow. And I'm not sure how. I guess it's because you use a different part of your brain. And that's really helpful to me. So.
Well, as you read, are you reading for pleasure? Or are you reading to say, sort of second guessing the author? Well, why is that there? Oh, I like that
Why is that
technique.
there? Oh, well, if it's a really good book, I mean, most books aren't that useful to me as far as inspiration goes, but I like to read them, you know. Like I think I write a kind of a particular way. I don't know. But the books that I really love, really, you know, it was a book that helped me a lot with the first one because it was really good for pacing. Was the first Hunger Games book. I don't even know what it's called, but maybe it's called Hunger Games. But she's a really good writer, particularly in that first one, and her pacing was magnificent. And that's where I got the idea of writing the first and the last lines of a book, of a chapter on a Post-it to look at them. Because when I read that book, my neighbor across the street taught high school, and she's like, I really want you to read this book because I kind of think it's really good and I don't know how to feel about it. And so it's not very long. I started reading it. I'd get to the end of a chapter and I think, oh geez, it's midnight, I need to go to sleep. And then but it would be on such a cliffhanger. And then I'd look at the first sentence of the next chapter and I go like, and the chapter's only 10 pages long. And then it was 3 a.m. and I had read the whole book. So that was a useful tip for me to like, make sure your last sentence is good, make sure your first sentence is good, and that the chapters aren't too long. Because you know how sometimes you're reading something, the chapter's 30 pages long and you're like, oh, I'm just too tired. So I guess I have a short attention span too, but anyway.
I can see that use of a cliffhanger, I guess, at the end of chapters in a lot of places in your book.
Good. I worked hard at it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that your signed copies are at Parnassus, and of course there's the Barnes and Noble
that has the pictures of people. There's a picture of me as a 13-year-old in the back of that, which may be how many people on this call remember me. So.
And we haven't talked about Porsha.
Porsha. And you know, it's because if you read the acknowledgments, and there's a joke in the back about my daughter, because you know she was 13 at one point. She's magnificent now, but 13 was hard. And there's a joke that's the kicker for the acknowledgments. And I showed it to her and I said, you read this and let me know if you're okay with it, because if it makes you mad or unhappy, I'm not going to do it, but I think it's really funny. And she's like, no, that'll be good. Because the thing is, like, there's nothing worse than a 13-year-old girl. They're so critical. And, you know, her parents are getting divorced and she doesn't want them to get divorced. She just wants them to stay together. And somebody actually wrote me on Instagram today that said, I was that kid. I knew my parents were unhappy and I didn't care. I just wanted them to stay together. And I was just like, oh my God. But that made me, because my parents were happily married and I'm happily married to my husband. So I kind of was extrapolating, and I was happy to hear that I had gotten that part right.
Yes, you did. Well, Julia, I've really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate that we had this time together and to catch back up.
Good. It was fun.
It was. Let's turn it back to Jonathan.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rupley.
Thank you, Julia and Stan. That's a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing more about the book. I'm kind of halfway through it, so I haven't finished.
Oh, good. We've ruined it for you now.
No, it's been great. It's a great overview of Better Luck Next Time. It does sound like a perfect movie. You know, we so appreciate you both spending time with us this Sunday evening. For everyone, if you haven't yet purchased a copy of this bestseller, you can do so at any of your favorite booksellers. As Stan mentioned, the book club edition is available at your Barnes and Nobles. And as Julia mentioned, signed copies are in stock at Parnassus Books in Nashville. Next up for Web Chats is a conversation about wine with class of 2010 graduate Ryan Steele, who is working towards his European Masters in Viticulture and Enology in France and Italy. Joining Ryan will be longtime Webb faculty member L.R. Smith. So it should be great fun to see these two talk about wine tasting. Join us on Thursday, March 25th at 5 p.m. for this web chat we're affectionately calling Sipping with Sonny, How to Taste Wine Like a Pro. Be on the lookout for that Zoom registration link soon. That's it for tonight. Thanks again, Julia and Stan, and everyone else for joining us. We look forward to talking with you soon. Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye, guys.